But all you need to know is that I was married in my first marriage. I was married at the cathedral in Montreal. And in the second one, I was married at the Church of the Advent, which no longer exists. I'm a member of St. John's the Evangelist, although I haven't been there for years. But yeah, so I tell you all that to tell you that I do have some concept of the church, and that I have been involved for several years, taught Sunday school, volunteered at St. Michael's Mission, as well as Benedict Clapper House. I do know this. And you have my my CV, so let's not waste more time on that. And in the interest of being totally open, one of the co-host tonight is actually a member of my family, or I don't know if I'm a member of his or he's a member of mine, but we are relatives, and that would be Dion. So just to put that out there so everybody knows that. Now, Dion, I need to be able to share my screen, because there's something I need, but I don't see the share part here. I seem to have lost it. Let me go back and see if I can find you. I can't see I don't see the buttons which allow me.
Is Myrna empowered as the host, Robert?
I need to become the host.
She is a co-host and does have sharing privileges.
I do have it?
You do, yes.
Because I don't see anything here that allows me to share. Nothing's coming up saying
Are you on a laptop?
I'm on my laptop, yeah, and that button that says share screen just is not presenting itself.
Just move the window a bit up.
I've done that, and it doesn't like me.
Aw.
It doesn't love me as it should. So I don't know. Dion, can you turn yourself on, please?
I'm here.
I need help being able to share my screen, and I don't see it presenting itself.
Do you have more than one Zoom window open?
No better than to do that one.
Okay.
No, I don't even see it presenting itself. I had it before you switched over. But as soon as you finish the prayer and switch here, I no longer see it. Let me.
Myrna,
I got it. I expanded the window and found it.
There. Okay.
All is good with the world again.
Okay. I was gonna say I'm.
Don't worry. We're good.
We're good now. All right. Perfect.
We're good.
Thank
so
you.
You tell me if you can see this. Can you see that?
Yes. So you can go.
Okay. So let me try and make the. Okay. Are we good?
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to start by asking Edward, would you be kind enough to read the poem, Edward? Hi, Deborah.
This is from the Iona community. We believe that God is present in the darkness before dawn, in the waiting and uncertainty where fear and courage join hands. Conflict and caring link arms, and the sun rises over barbed wire. We believe in a with us God who sits down in our midst to share our humanity. We affirm a faith that takes us beyond a safe place into action, into vulnerability, and onto the streets. We commit ourselves to work for change and to put ourselves on the line, to bear responsibility, take risks, live powerfully and face humiliation, to stand with those on the edge, to choose life and be used by the Spirit for God's new community of hope. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. That sets the tone for how we're going to proceed. We're going to proceed in love, in caring. We're going to proceed without trying to make anyone feel uncomfortable. Well, that's not true. We want them to feel a little bit uncomfortable, but we don't want anyone to be damaged. We don't want anyone to feel attacked. I'm going to read you what MLK, Martin Luther King, said in his letters from a Birmingham jail. We're going to come back to that later. He said, but the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If today's church does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authenticity, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. Unfortunately, it still holds true today, even though the centuries have changed. Every day, I meet young people whose disappointment with the church has turned into outright disgust. We must not run from this. As painful as it is to hear it, we must not run from this. We must face it. But as I said, we're going to do this in the spirit of love. We're not attacking anyone. Few ground rules. I'm going to use words such as white ideology and white hegemony, systemic racism, systemic discrimination. And I'm going to repeat them. White hegemony, white ideology, systemic discrimination. Notice that every time I use the word white, it has something attached to it. In other words, white is an adjective. It's not a noun. So this is not a black versus white situation or a white versus indigenous situation or a white versus people of color. That's not the issue here. We're not going there. It's unhelpful. We're not going to accuse anybody of anything, but we are going to look at systemic discrimination. We are going to look at white ideology. We are going to look at white hegemony, but we are not going to look at white people or Black people. That's not what we're doing. You're going to hear words such as dominant and subjugated. You're going to hear things about above the line and below the line. That will be explained. But and you're going to hear me repeat several times, this is not a Black-white issue. This is not a white indigenous issue. This is not a white persons of color issue. This is a situation of above and below the line of hegemony and ideology. Before I go any further, are there any questions there or comments? Is that clear to everyone? Does anyone need to say anything about that? Is that okay? Is it clear? Okay. I do want you to feel a little bit of discomfort because we are going to do introspection, but I don't want you to feel attacked because that is not the issue. Are we good? Okay. All righty then. Here we go. So let's take a look at the first thing I want you to see. When we talk about, let's set the table. When we talk about culture, what do we mean? Essentially, we're talking about three types of culture. A lot of people think of culture and they think of ethnicity and race. That is definitely a definition. A second definition is a community of people coming together for a common purpose, such as Anglicans. They form a community, they form a culture. Then there's arts and culture, with which a lot of us, of course, are very much cognizant. For example, books, movies, theater, plays, that's arts and culture. But what we need to recognize is that all three of these are very heavily intertwined. And that the third one, arts and culture, comes down to whose art, whose culture. And the answer to that often dictates what happens within the community of people. It also dictates how ethnicity and race are depicted. So if you look at it from a white hegemonic perspective or a white ideological perspective, as the church has done since its inception, and certainly heavily starting from the 17th century, it becomes arts and culture depicting ethnicity and race and the community of people through the eyes of that hegemony, through the eyes of that ideology. So we have, for example, the all-white blonde-haired Jesus, which we all know makes no sense, given the geographic nature from which this man hailed. But because the ideology is one of white ideology and white hegemony, those things from arts and culture depict those 1 and 2 through the eyes of arts and culture from those who practice white hegemony and who practice white ideology. Now, this doesn't mean that people are inherently bad by doing that. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that in 17th century colonialism, this is the way things were, and it continued, and it continues until today. So I was in, for example, I was in a meeting the other day, last week, 2 meetings. I thought it was interesting, one meeting after the other, and both of them wanted me to come and set up a EDI, which is equity, diversity, and inclusion for them. And they all came with their boards, both boards of board of directors were there, boards of director. And the interesting thing is not one of them, both of them, neither one of them had a non-white person on that board. And yet they were talking about inclusion and equity and diversity. And I asked them, what does it feel like? How does that work? How do we talk about the other without inviting the other in? How do we justify that? And no one had ever thought of it. These were not bad people. These were not people who sat around and said, let's not let Indigenous people on our board. Let's not have Black people on our board. Let's not have South Asians on it. It was not that. They just didn't think of it. It just never occurred to them because they live in a structure which was established in the 17th century, which continues to today, and which says, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about that. And so what we're doing, what the church needs to do now, is the church needs to think about that. And I know you've started thinking about it. I know that I'm not telling you anything that's new, like you don't know this. I know that. But I want you to know that you don't need, that you can be free here. You can, and I want to put this out here and tell you, look, I don't expect you to be perfect. And you shouldn't expect me to be perfect. Let's not try to be perfect. Let's just try to do the best we can for each other. So if you bounce, I will catch you. But I do hope that if I bounce, you will catch me. That's what I need. That's what you need. The church is heavily, heavily intertwined with social action. Always has been. Now, I am not a theologian. I'm a psychologist. I have my degrees, my joint degree, my PhD is in biomedical ethics and psychology. Studied a lot of philosophy. I understand this stuff, but I am not a theologian. I will not pretend to be a theologian. That's not my forte. But I do understand that the church is heavily intertwined with social action. And Jesus was a social activist. There is no doubt in my mind that Jesus was a social activist. This was a man who came along and challenged the status quo, who said, what you've been doing, the way you've been doing this is questionable. You can't treat people like this. This is a man who overturned the tables in the temple and said, what are you doing? This is a man who reached out to the lepers, who reached out to women, who said, no, you can't do that. Let us advocate for change, but not just advocate. Let's take action. Let's show that we're advocating. One of the problems with the church, as you see here, you have been very forward. You've been female forward, you've been gay forward, you've been Indigenous forward, but the fact is the glass ceiling is still there. As I said, Jesus was a social activist, but it was not isolated within walls and rituals and ceremonies, but Jesus got down and dirty with the multitude. And that's what I believe the church is called upon to do. But don't beat yourself up. Just look inward, institutionally and personally, because you see, there is no reconciliation without truth. We have to face the truth. And it's not a matter of saying, well, that was the 17th century, that happened, now it's over, let's move on. We have to look at what has happened as a result of the decisions which were made. What has happened to the children? How are the children today reacting? How are people, how are the elders reacting? So yes, we've been forward. We've been, as I said, all these, females, gays, indigenous forward, but the glass ceiling is still there. We've never had a non-white primate, for example. We've got a female primate, but we can't say that because we've got a female primate, that means we've covered everything, because we haven't. We've got, I know that we've got archdeacons, I know that, but how many do we have? Are we really representative of the population we're serving? Those are the questions we have to ask. The glass ceiling is there. And if we continue in a situation where some are saying we will be beneficent and we will bestow things upon you, rather than asking you to come in and be part of the decision making on how we make those decisions, and stop bestowing beneficence, but saying, let's create together, that glass ceiling will never go away. We have to challenge ourselves. We have to look at ourselves. It's not always going to be pretty, but that's okay. But just remember that no one is perfect, and we shouldn't try to be. I'm going to stop here for a second and ask you, how is everybody doing? Please engage with me. I don't want to be out here by myself. I
Very
know
well,
I can
thank
see
you.
that there's other people there.
Fine,
Fine.
fine, well,
You okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, because my intention here now is not to harm you, but it is to make you look, just as I need to look. So
Feeling Jesus was a social activist is our new t-shirt slogan. I love it.
But Jesus was a social activist. If we step back
Yeah.
and take a look at it, this man came along and said, what are you people doing? Come on, let's join up here. You guys, the 12 of you, come here. And the women, even though, we don't like to talk about the fact that Jesus had female followers and we make it sound as though it was only male toxicity going on there. But Jesus said, hey, bring the kids in, bring the women in. Mary, Martha, all of you, come here. I got stuff to tell you. Yeah, I'm going to come over to your house, Martha, and I'm going to eat your food and drink your wine. Yeah, you run out of booze? Let me make you some.
So Myrna, the chat is saying, grateful to be here. We're tougher than you think. Very captivating. Please keep going. Okay, so far doing well. A-okay.
Okay.
Keep going. Good.
Thank you, Bishop Mary.
You're welcome.
My daughter is absolutely in love with you, by the way.
Oh, isn't that nice? Maybe we can have lunch. Tell her we can have lunch.
Yeah. Do you know who my daughter is?
No.
Renata Betts. She did some stuff with you guys at the cathedral. She's totally in love with you.
He did.
That's
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah. So, all right,
Dr.
if everybody's
Lashley,
okay. Sorry?
Dr. Lashley, my name is Graham. I'm one of the pastors downtown.
Yes.
And I would just say that we have a very broad, we have some who use a lot of candles and incense, those kind of Anglicans. And then we have the kind of happy clappy, kind of the more Pentecostal side of things.
Yes.
That's the side that I come from. And in our side, we would say a lot of amens, hallelujahs, that's good, preach it, come on. And so we didn't want to interrupt you, but that's what I would like to I've said all of those things at multiple points along what you said so far. So we love what you're keep going.
Okay.
Dr. Lashley, here's another one. I have to keep reminding myself to define reconciliation as making things right, because we have never had a right relationship with our Indigenous community. There's nothing to go back to. We can only go forward.
Absolutely. And that's a good place to be. That's an excellent place to be. So let's go for it. I will stop every once in a while and ask how you're doing, because that's the psychologist in me, making sure that everybody's okay. I'm not about to give that up. Okay, so let's talk about this thing of colonialism. Started with 17th century colonialism. Now, in order to enslave people, in order to ethnically displace people, I didn't tell you I was also in the Canadian Navy. In regular forces. One thing you learn is that in order to kill somebody, you got to dehumanize them. That's the first thing you've got to do. So you had to dehumanize people that you were going to enslave, that you were going to convince yourself were below you, that you could abuse these people, that you could take their lands, that you could put them in the bottom of a ship, that you could take their children, that you could visit the quarters where you house them and rape them, and then call them animals and have children with them, and not ask yourself, what does it say about me mating with an animal and producing a baby with an animal? What does that make me if I say that this is an animal? So you have to dehumanize the people. You have to ethnically displace people and say, I'm putting you on the long march, indigenous person. I'm taking your land. I'm going to put you on the reserve, and I'm going to say, this is all mine. You have to dehumanize them. And in order to do that, with the land grabs and taking people's lives and destroying them, this started with 17th century colonialism as the slave ships were built and as land grabs were taking place. That has continued to today, because by setting up white ideology as the norm, even today, the lighter your skin is, whether you're in a Black community or in an indigenous community or people of color community, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, the lighter the skin is, the more valued that person is, even within their families. Even within their families. I have a sister who's much lighter than I am. And my other sisters who are around my company, we always knew that that sister was given more value by some members of the family than the rest of us were. We always knew that. And sometimes it was said quite openly, because I'm not angry with the people in my family, because they were taught and it handed down from the 17th century that the ideal is white ideology. So obviously, the closer you are to the representation of that ideology, the more valued you become. There were people, for example, who, I can think of one instance, but in one of the history books, of this lady who's denied that she was her daughter's mother in order to give her daughter a foot up. Her daughter was quite light, and her mother pretended to be her maid so that this girl could be seen as acceptable within the white hegemony in terms of beauty and her hair and all of those things, that she could be accepted and be married to a white male. And her mother, you know, in the story, it says that her mother actually arranged for her to have an abortion, to have her uterus removed, so that she couldn't bear children, so that these children would never, ever, ever run the chance of coming out darker than she was. Even though she was married, she was going to be married to a white man. That's what that ideology did to people. That's what it continues to do to people. The hair was straightened and continues to be straightened with thermal applications as well as chemicals. The first big, I don't even know what to call it, but the first big embellishment of the natural hairstyles of Black people in the New World, this so-called New World, was lye. It was used to straighten the hair so that your hair would become closer to the texture of your mistress. And when you worked in the house, if you were brought into the house to work, you tied your hair. You were told, tie up your hair. We don't want to see those nappy dreads on your head. The pigtails of Chinese people were removed right here in Canada. And they cut the hair of South Asians and other indigenous people were cut. and coloration was always an issue. Now, where I get annoyed is that the church didn't say anything. It was just accepted. This is the way it is. Again, I don't get angry at the congregants, but I do get annoyed at the institution. The congregants, they were told you live above the line, and I'm going to tell you what the line is in a few seconds. But what I need you to understand is that this sting of colonialism has continued until today. So when I'm talking about the church, I'm not attacking the church in any way. I'm saying that when we look at things, the church has got to take on the role of social activism. You can't do it by just staying within the confines of the walls of the rituals. The continued effects it's a type of domination which set up the world order so that one class of people control and exercise dominance, such as, political dominance, religious dominance, economic, educational, linguistic, the whole thing, over other people. And some people are forced to wear several masks. This concept of the mask comes from Frantz Fanon, and I'll tell you about that a little bit later. But people have to wear masks just to survive, depending on the situation. And the wearing these masks often results in mental and physical distresses. So you smile when you don't want to smile. You internalize the microaggressions. You pretend that everything is okay. Make sure that you don't speak too loudly. Make sure that you don't go out with a hoodie, because if you're a Black male, you might get stopped by the police, or you might get, someone will assume, as with Trayvon Martin, he's wearing a hoodie. Oh, he must be disreputable. White kid, we've done a lot of research on this. White young man wearing a hoodie. Oh, he must be an athlete. Maybe he's cold. He's out for a walk. That kind of consideration is very seldom visited upon Black and brown bodies. What this means is that this all leads to intergenerational trauma. And these are all the continued effects of colonialism. Don't worry, I will explain what intergenerational trauma is. I'm just setting it up for you. And I'm doing this so that you understand that I'm really not talking about Black people, white people. I'm talking about hegemony and ideology. But the thing is that colonialism is everybody's nemesis, and it's everybody's business. We don't get to say, well, it doesn't happen to me, so that's got nothing to do with me. That's not true. Broken Leg, who writes a lot about Native people, he's a Sioux, he's a psychologist from the Sioux Nation in the Dakotas. He said, you know what? Traumatic experiences are cumulative. And if one generation does not heal, problems are transmitted to subsequent generations. In other words, cultural trauma, the trauma that happens to that culture, influences how people see the world and the emotions they experience. It leaves deep wounds. So you and I may look at the same thing, stand by next to each other, looking at the same thing, but my experience and the experience of my people and my people's people all the way back is going to influence how I see it. And your experience and the influence of your people and your people all the way back is going to influence how we see the same issue, how we see the same thing that's happening in front of us, which means that we've got to learn how to talk to each other. You've got to be able, and I've got to be able, when we talk about it, for us to hear each other rather than say, oh, no, c'est pas ça, that's not, c'est pas vrai, c'est pas la vérité, c'est pas ça. No, we can't do that. You've got to realize that you don't have my experiences, and I've got to realize I do not have yours. So we've got to enter into dialogue, which means we've both got to shut up and listen. As Broken Leg said, the question we should be asking is not, what's wrong with those people? Which is the question we often ask. What's wrong with them? Why are they being like that? Why is that person who's come down from the north lying on the street on St. Catherine, why is that person drunk? Why are they begging? Why is this happening? Broken Legs said, let's stop asking that question. Let's ask what's been done to them, which is a completely different question. What's wrong with them? He said, no, don't ask that. Ask what's been done to them. In other words, let's stop blaming the victim. Because as I said, white ideology is the issue, not white people. Is there anything anyone want to say there before I move on?
Yes, if I may.
Please.
I just have a question regarding your situating the start of colonialism to the 17th century.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that it began way before that.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that. I know where you're going. Yes, you're right. But someone said, like the Irish and the Scots. I'm talking, yes. But I'll let you continue, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the slave ships and the movement and moving bodies and taking land. But yes, please continue. I just want to make sure. Yes, please continue.
Well, it seems that ever since the Europeans found a way around Africa, Cape of Good Hope, and then Columbus came, the Americas, all in the 1400s or 15th century. That's when it started, because this idea of them being superior to the people they found. I'm questioning about whether it's earlier than 17th century.
Yes, thank you for that. Your point is very well made. When it became solidified, however, is when it became hard commerce. When the Middle Passage started in the 1600s, when we started moving people around, when we started saying, I own everything, I control everything. That's when it became solidified, commercialized. Before then, it was, yeah, we're here, we're going to go around and cut the corn, and yes, everything we see, we're going to stick a flag in it and say it's ours. But when they started transporting people, that's when it became something, became solidified. That's when people started writing it up and saying, you own this, we can put you in the bottom of this ship. We dehumanize you. Before, they said, we own this, we're better than you. But the real dehumanization started with those ships.
Well, to put it crassly, white Europeans found out that they could sell black human beings for money.
Exactly.
That was about 1500.
Absolutely. It became commercial. And they found out they could sell them. And the minute they said that, it had to become codified. It was no more this nebulous thing about, I'm better than you and I can take your land, but hey, there's money to be made. And we have to recognize that the church and church people were very involved in the slave trade. I mean, they blessed the ships. Very often they had ownership in the ships. How do you bless a ship that you know is going to take another human being and put them in the bottom of it and bring them back and sell them as chattel? But they blessed them. They benefited from them. They built mansions from them. This was strict commerce. But you cannot, it's very difficult. One thing I learned in the armed services, very difficult to kill somebody if you see them as equal to you. It's hard. How do I look you in the eye and say, you and I are equal? I see you, Camille. You and I are equal, but I'm going to throw you in the bottom of that ship and I'm going to rip that baby out of you and I'm going to rape you. But then I'm going to call you an animal and I'm going to have a kid with you. And I'm going to call my own child an animal instead of my child because I need to make money. How do you do that? You have to dehumanize. Yes, Camille.
Okay, I have two comments and a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I must tell you that as as a Black person who has never, ever thought of myself as anything else but Black, coming out of the West Indies, I have faced a lot of very nasty colorism, in addition to racism, but I was never favored in my family or anything like that. I just wanted to say that, and I've taken Black people to task when they've mentioned what they think is a compliment for my right. Good. But I just wanted to say that I hope at some point you will address the issue of colorism within this context, how it has impacted us.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's the comment that I'm making. The question I have also, or maybe you may want to speak to this, is that we have been told that it was our own Black African fellow brothers and sisters who sold us into slavery. I have no doubt that that could have taken place, but I don't fully believe it. I do believe that if you could address that, I would appreciate, because there's some people who would sit here and say, well, your own Black people sold you into that. They saw what was happening. And I'm not sure that that is accurate. Could you address that? And thank you.
Yes, ma'am. The fact is that they were involved in wars. And one of the things that they wanted to do, some interesting films that have been made by Black people precisely about that. I'll try and write it down for you if you're here tomorrow morning and tell you. But yes, they were involved in wars and they would sell their captives. That had been a practice that has happened throughout history. The people sold their captives. I don't think, however, that they had any understanding. Excuse me, I've got hiccups. Excuse me. I beg your pardon. I don't think that they had any understanding of what was going to happen to those people, that they were going to be put into the bottom of a ship and sold. I mean, I've spoken to people from Cape Verde, for example, which was one of the starting points. And to this day, they say to me, we didn't know. We didn't know they were going to do that. We thought we were selling people in the same way that we always did that with the captives that we got in our wars. They did not know that it was going to be this inhuman a thing. You also have to remember that the ship's captains and the crews really didn't go inland. They just had to bring the ships up to the gates, to the jails, to the shores, and they were loaded on. They didn't have to go and capture them. But these were captives. And captives have been sold all the time. Today, they're still selling captives. But I don't think, I've never seen anything or read anything that said that they understood just what they were selling these people into.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Now, let's tell you what are all these things that have been sleeping around here. Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon was a psychiatrist. He lived in France. He was originally from Guadeloupe. And he wrote several books, one of which, when I talk about the mask, is based on his work, Black Skin, White Mask. And the other one called The Wretched of the Earth. He wrote a lot more, but these are the two that I tend to relate to a lot. And Frantz Fanon said, first of all, he came up with this because he was working with the Algerians in France. And he realized that the things that the French were saying about the Algerians were so horrible, were so dehumanizing. And he said, how can you purport to be helping people that you ridicule like that, that you disparage like that you see as inhuman, that you see as beasts? How can you do that? So he stopped working for the French government as a psychiatrist and actually went and worked in Algeria with the Algerians trying to help them. And he said, you know, there's an invisible horizontal line of who's above and who's below the line. And it comes out of white ideology and white agenda. It's the way it was set up again from the 17th century. And he said, blacks, he was talking a lot about Algerians then, but in his book, Black Skin, White Mask, he said, blacks have been primed to see themselves as inferior and internalize that inferiority. Now, a lot of people, you know, on first hearing that might say, no, that's not me, but it's true. I mean, I treat a lot of people who have internalized the inferiority in the sense like, I can't do that, or they're not going to let me do that. You know, the white people aren't going to let me do that. That's how that has become internalized. And that inferiority has become internalized to the point where it has become debilitating. And Frantz Fanon says that what happens is that every morning before you go out, you take a deep breath, you have your black skin, but you put on your white mask. You buy into the hegemony, you buy into the ideology, you dress a certain way, you walk a certain way, you make sure that your mannerisms are a certain thing because you want to fit in and you also don't want to be attacked. And he said, having to wear the mask brings about that sense of inferiority. And inferiority, it becomes natural. It becomes natural to you. And we know that even successful people have difficulty escaping the mask. Barack Obama and Michelle Obama in her book talks about what it was like for her having to wear that mask every day in the White House, not being herself, making sure that she enunciated the right way, make sure that she moved the right way, spoke the right way. When Trayvon Martin was killed, Barack Obama said, oh, for goodness sake, that could have been my kid. He was castigated for saying that. Oh, you're being racist for saying that. I said, no, I'm not being racist. I'm telling you, the way the structure is set up, Trayvon could have been my kid. Could have been my kid who went out there to the kushta to get a smoothie or whatever it is, and ended up being killed by this vigilante who saw himself as living above the line, who saw himself as better than. And when you look at the whole issue of intersectionality, some people are forced to wear several masks, depending on the situation. So if you're Indigenous and Black, you might be wearing those two masks, but then let's add to that Indigenous, Black, and three-spirited. Or Indigenous, Black, three-spirited with different abilities. Let's say you're wheelchair bound, and you have to wear all these masks because of this invisible horizontal line that has put some people above the line and some people below the line. So if you live above the line, the thing is, it traps you. You're a prisoner there also. It's not just the people who live below the line. So everybody's entrapped by this thing. Because living above the line tells you, this is your place. You own everything. You can make all these decisions. And when you live below the line, the First Nations, Indigenous, people of color, Black people, we've been told you're not as good as. And so you tell your children, you have to give them skills in how to survive, which people who live above the line don't have to. And there's a role for the church there. The church and church people need to understand that. You need to understand what your congregants who are sitting there, what they're not just saying, hallelujah, amen. Their meditation, even their Lord's Prayer may have a different interpretation to them than it has to you who live above the line. But here's the thing. I'm going to talk to you about a wicked problem. Wicked problems are based on design, plan, and theory. And racism is listed as one of the wicked problems. And this is what you need to know about a wicked problem as you work this through.
Myrna?
A wicked problem is not simple. So racism is not simple. A wicked problem is multifaceted. Racism is multifaceted. Has very, very many angles to it. It's very difficult to define. There's so many definitions of racism. There's no one definition. They all come to the same point, but the definitions vary. They all go in the same direction, but the definitions vary. And you know why? Because it's difficult to define. Is what Racism over here, is it hold it for the definition on the right? Does it hold for the definition on the left, above, below? What is it? We know what it does, but how do we define it? We know that fixing one aspect often leads to issues in others. So if we say racism is about economics and we put everything solving with economics, we might be able to bring some poverty maybe in there, but not necessarily. But it doesn't address the issue of education. It doesn't address the issue of healthcare. It doesn't address the issue of the glass ceiling. So fixing one aspect of it often leads to issues in others. It's not stable. It is not a stable problem. Not only is it multifaceted and not simple, but it's not stable, because something that might have been racism yesterday is not racism today. Some of you may or may not know that I just did a major review of the systems within the Lester B. Pearson School Board. And one of the things that somebody said, oh, well, let's stop anybody from in the school from saying the N-word. And a lot of people there cheering. And it was mostly people above the line. People above the line say, that's a good idea. But here's the thing, and it sounds great on the surface. Yeah, nobody should use the N-word. And then they say, and if anybody uses the N-word in the school, they're going to get in trouble. But what wasn't understood, what I had to work with them to understand, is what a bad idea that was. Because for a lot of Black kids, that N-word is a sign of camaraderie. When that Black child says to another child, hello, my N, they're not using it in the way someone above the line uses that word. They're saying, I got your back. I see you. I know who you are. I know we have a similar history. You're my friend. You're there for me. I'm there for you. So who's going to use that word the most? It's going to be those Black kids. So who's going to get oppressed? Who's going to get punished the most? It's going to be those Black kids. So the very thing you think you're doing to help the Black kid is going to oppress the Black kid more. Also, what do? You tell the kids don't sing their songs. There's a lot of things in those songs. People get upset hearing the word, but you've got to listen to what that word is saying. And what follows, what precedes and what follows the introduction of the word in the song. So it's socially complex and it has no clear solution. But one thing we all agree on is that it calls for behavior change. So if the church is going to come up with all kinds of theories and procedures and policies, all nice and fine, but they can't stay within the walls. They can't stay embedded within the rituals. You've got to get out there. Remember, Jesus was a social activist. He was outside. You've got to come out and you've got to show behavior change. It can't just be a behavior change that we talk about. It's got to be something that we do, and we've got to make it known that we're doing it. And that's one of the reasons I think that the logo for this would make a great t-shirt. Because if I see you walking down the street with something that says Anglicans for racial equality, or Anglicans against racial discrimination, Anglicans against Anglicans for all children matter, I know I've got me an ally. I don't just walk by and see this great big stone building and say, whatever. I know that there's some behavioral changes going on inside there. And that's what we need to show.
Nikki had a question just before you go to the next slide.
Okay, let me come up and see if I can see Nikki. Yes, Nikki.
Hi, it's not so much a question. And I'm sorry to interrupt your flow, but I just wanted to maybe direct you to the chat, because there's a lot of like rich conversation going on there.
Right.
And, you know, I think you value feedback. And
yes, I do.
Input. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
No, it's a good 2 cents, because you see, I can't see you when I've got it full. When I've got it full screen, I don't see the chat.
Of course. So yeah.
So what are you drawing my Oh, isn't that nice? As an LB, thank you, parent. I hope you read the report. And drawing that line between in-group seems to be an absolute intractable human impulse. And Jesus Jesus said, stop that. Absolutely. The problem is that the line exists within the system. Yes, 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 yes. And we're going to get to that. Yes, the line exists within the system. And that's exactly what Isabel Wilkerson talks about when she talks in her book, Caste. Isabel Wilkerson said, maybe we shouldn't even be using the word race. First of all, you all know race doesn't exist. We share 99.9% of our genes. So I don't even know what race means. It has no biological sense. And if you understand that we share 99.9% of our genes, I have no idea where Black starts and Indigenous begins and white starts. Makes no sense whatsoever. But yes, that line exists. You're absolutely right. So if we go back, you'll see here that I had mentioned, I didn't say it, but I had it on the slide. Isabel Wilkerson says, caste, she says it has several lines. And it speaks to what you just said, which is that, let me see if I can get back. Oh, yes, I'll be there in a second. Which W.Y. Wakeland.
Yvonne. Yeah, Yvonne.
Oh, Yvonne, I'll be there in a second. Which is that, as this person said, even within that system, within a group, even with those below the line, there are lines. And her point is that maybe we shouldn't talk about race. Maybe we should talk about caste. Because what a lot of people, if you look at India, say you're born into this caste and you stay here, even though the government has said we shouldn't be using that anymore. Don't use it, but it hasn't stopped it. So I have a friend who's a world-renowned psychiatrist. And he was born into what's known as the Dalits, which is the so-called untouchables. His father repaired shoes along the highway. And he had a customer who was a Brahmin. And the Brahmin would stop and get his shoes repaired and shined and everything. And one day the Brahmin said to my friend's father, you know, your child is very bright, but he'll never get out. He'll never get to show that because here in India, you're born into that caste, you cannot get out. May I take your child? Will you trust me to take your child? You'll always have access to your child, but let me take your child. I don't like this caste system, but let me do my bit. Let me show behavioral change. Don't let me just talk about it. Let me do it. Father said yes. He put that child through school. Kid went up, from India, went to Oxford, did 1 degrees, went over to Cambridge. Today, he's a world famous psychiatrist. And when I talked to him, we do work together. When I talked to him, he says, when I'm here in Canada or in England where he lives, he says, I feel fine, except when I see people from the Brahmin class and I meet with them in England or here. He said, I go back to being below the line. It's so inculcated in me that I have a hard time getting out. He has devoted his life as a psychiatrist to working to help the so-called untouchables. That's where his interest is. That's what he's trying to do. But that's what it does to you. So before I go here, thank you, Nikki, for bringing my attention to the chat. I'm going to go to Yvonne Wakeland, please. Hello?
I didn't have a question, Myrna. Sorry about that.
Oh, because your hand is up here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was fiddling with my computer.
Okay, all right. I could tell you the name of the psychiatrist, but I don't know if I want to because I don't know how many people to whom he's told this story to. And so I feel I have to protect his confidentiality. I do not assume that Anglican is going to make it out of this line of thought alive as a helpful plan. I'm really not sure I wanted to. Fair enough. You're going to have an opportunity to deal with that. What would it look like to see the reunification of the church as one of the outcomes of tackling our complicity in these tools? Do you mean the reunification of the Catholic and Holy Catholic churches of the Anglicans and the Romans?
Yes, Dr. Lashley, I was referring to really any follower of Christ coming together under in the same, as in John 17. No denominational divisions whatsoever. To me, I think is the destiny that we are to look forward to. And as we solve some of these problems, I think we should be seeing reunification of the church, which means I think we should be prepared to drop some of the sub brands that may have in themselves. I mean, you began by talking about the distinction between Methodists and Anglicans. Of course, Methodists come from the Anglican Church, and these are tragic divisions that have been part of those racial divides.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think when we start talking about Black liberation theology, I think we'll understand why some of those things have happened and what we need to do to erase that so that we can have the outcome to which you were alluding. So fake it until you make it. I believe that it has to be based on a change of attitudes and beliefs. Absolutely. A long and challenging journey. Precisely so. So let's look at but by the way, my name is Myrna. Okay, Dr. Lashley is a title that they gave me because I wrote some stuff and, and attended some classes, but my name is Myrna. So let's look at the fallout from, I'm going to lower this again, from racism. What does it mean? Racism is not victimless. And I mentioned earlier intergenerational trauma. Let's talk about what that is. Dealing with racism, if you're Black or Indigenous or a person of color, dealing with that and teaching children how to survive it traumatizes the children and it re-traumatizes the adults. What does that mean? In order to give the child what that child needs to cope with the vicissitudes of life, of being someone from below the line, that parent, that adult, whoever's explaining it to the child, relives what's happened to them. As Broken Leg said, I showed you earlier, if you don't fix it in one generation, it's going to get carrying on. They relive that trauma, but you also traumatize your kid. Because you see, these two little boys, one from above the line, one from below the line. They grew up, they're friends. They see each other as brothers or sisters or brother and sister, whatever, cousins, whatever. That's how they view each other. But one day, the little kid who lives below the line, his parental authority has to say to him or her, let me tell you some truths about life. This is a conversation that if you live above the line, you never have to have with your kid. So you have to tell your kid about 10 and 2. Which a lot of people who live above the line, when I say 10 and 2, they have no idea what I'm talking about. Even though every one of us who's learned to drive, we're taught about 10 and 2. Keep your hand at 10 and 2. So you have to tell your little kid, if the police stop you, make sure you make no sudden moves. Keep your hands at 10 and 2. Bow, lower your gaze. But yet we're telling kids, look people in the eye, it's a sign of respect. Now we're having to say, no, that's no longer a sign of respect. Lower your gaze. If you go into the store and you buy a piece of bubble gum, do not leave the store without that receipt. That's what we have. Things like that we have to tell our kids. Make sure that if you're out at night and you're wearing a hoodie, for God's sake, if you're very dark, make sure that hoodie is not dark. Take down the hoodie so people can see. If you're very big, our Black kids often assumed that they're older than they are. So the police are very quick, or other people are very quick to say, look at a 14-year-old kid who's very tall and say, oh, that's a man. Be careful what you do in the gym. If you get bulk up too much, someone might see you as being dangerous. If you get on the bus, the little old lady puts her purse closer to her. Don't go off. Whatever you do, don't go off. And very often, in order to get your kid to understand, you have to tell them what you've gone through. So you're re-traumatizing yourself and you're traumatizing the kid. Now, the little kid above the line, Nobody's telling that kid that, because they don't need to know that. Nothing's going to happen to them. Now, what would be helpful is if the mother above the line and the mother below the line could sit down and have a free, frank, and honest dialogue and say, this is what happened, so that when one child is told this is what you have to expect, that the mother above the line or whoever the parental authorities can say to her kid or his kid, this is what your child, but your friend's going to go through. Do not step into that rabbit hole. Help them, be there with them, stand up for them. This is still the person you called your brother 2 minutes ago before I told you this. But that's not happening. And frankly, the church isn't doing it because I don't think this has hit them. Not because anybody's bad, but because if you live above the line, you never think that you have to do this. So what are some of the other things? As I said, it's not victimless. We've seen cardiovascular difficulties as a result of racism. We've seen eating disorders. Remember I told you about the mask. We've seen anxiety. We've seen social fears. Because when you're wearing that mask, you're under stress. You're constantly under stress. We've seen substance abuse. We've seen domestic and child abuse. You can't haul off and hit the boss or the people at work who think that their microaggressions are funny. And when you say it's not funny, that, oh, you've got a chip on your shoulder. What do you do when somebody comes and say, can I touch your hair for good luck? Or can I see what your hair feels like? When all of that is happening, you can't do the displacement. So you go home. I mean, you can't do it directly. You go home and you displace. And you take it out on your family. You take it out on the animals. So we see all of this. So as I said, I'm just repeating what I said earlier, that dealing with racism and teaching children how to survive it traumatizes children and re-traumatizes adults. And I've given you twice, because I put it on the slide twice, all the references that you can see to get it. There are other people who are saying, it's not just me saying this. This is not stuff that I'm making up. This is a fact. And as I said, Jesus was a social activist. The church needs to take on its social activist role. The congregation needs to take on its social activist role. So let's talk about trauma. Well, trauma literature does not refer to the trauma of slavery, unfortunately. But it does recognize floods and earthquakes and the Holocaust and sexual abuse and so forth. But it never talks about trauma, about slavery. Only lately it started to talk about indigeneity. Several learned societies now have apologized for ignoring the intergenerational trauma of Black and Indigenous people. But as I said, with Indigenous people, it's relatively new. And again, as Broken Leg said, stop asking what's wrong with these people and ask what's been done to them. Soteria said, historical trauma is a subjugation of one group by a dominant group. And I've explained what I mean by the dominant. I talked about Fanon's line. And Soteria said it involves overwhelming physical and psychological violence, segregation, displacement, economic deprivation, and cultural dispossession. That's what it does to people. But this is something that BIPOC people, I hate the term, that BIPOC people face this every day. But the interesting thing is that what I just told you is not new to the dominant group. It's not new. It's just that most people haven't wanted to hear it. And so when you said Black Lives Matter, implicitly meaning Black Lives Matter too, the pushback was, well, white lives matter. Well, no one ever said white lives didn't matter. It was an affirmation that said, can you please see me? I matter. And then, of course, we had Indigenous Lives Matter also, and, every child matters thing, but that initial pushback was, oh, that's reverse racism, which does not exist, by the way, because there's no power. White lives matter too. So they weren't hearing. And what did that do? That antagonized people even more. And people just walked up and said, they don't care about me. And I'm going to talk about why the Black church became so important. And I just want to make sure that we say that you can recognize historical facts, but refuse to recognize its existential and experiential effects. You can say to people, you got a chip on your shoulder. Oh, for God's sake, why don't you grow up? Or you talk about slavery again. Oh, what is wrong with you, Black people? What's wrong with you, Indigenous people? What's wrong with you people? You know, that's what happened. So you can say, yeah, we know it exists, and do absolutely nothing about it. Now, this whole thing by Paul, Black, Indigenous people of color, it's become an issue because what a lot of people who live above the line have done is they've embraced the POC, but they've ignored the Black and Indigenous. And so they say, well, we put everybody on the POC. Everybody's a person of color. So I don't have to look and see if I've got Black people in the boardroom. I don't have to look and see if I've got Indigenous people in the boardroom because POC covers everybody. No, it does not. No, it does not. So we have to look at inherited privilege. It's painful. What we're asking each other to do is painful. It's very, very painful. So I gotta get you to this point. Let me see. Yeah, okay, we're almost there. Okay, we're good. So I want to ask you, I want to stop here for a second before I go any further. And I want to see how everybody's doing.
You've got some interesting comments. You might like to just have a quick look.
Let's take a look. Wearing the uniform. Let's see, how far back do I go? Masking is a common term used in disability studies too, yes. And of course, it is also intersectional, precisely. We know, for example, that artistic traits in white kids are frequently awkward, absolutely. But in Black and Indigenous, they're more likely to be called antisocial, yes, and can often be life-threatening in interactions with law enforcement, precisely. Grace says, and the ludicrous, oh yes, blue lives matter, yeah, as though policemen are born wearing a uniform, right? And you know, within the police, some of you may or may not know that I do a lot of work with the police, and I do work with all three levels of government in radicalization. Even, and I think Camille brought it up earlier, that there are lines even within there. So you're a Black policeman or Indigenous policeman or what have you, and very often you're still not treated the same way as the other policemen. Now let's take a look at what happened to Mr. Camera a couple of months back. Remember the case of Mr. Camera? Mr. Camera called the police to tell them somebody is attacking your policeman. And what did they do? The policeman came and arrested him. This cost this man his PhD placement. It cost him the job he had in the lab. It cost him all kinds of things. It cost him his teaching job at the university because they put him in jail. His wife was pregnant, and they could have looked at that camera anytime. That man spent 6 days in jail with them saying, yeah, he did it, and this, and the rhetoric that was stated about this man who tried to help them because they saw this Black man, and it never occurred to them that he was being a good citizen. He waited there to show them where the man was. And what did they do? They arrested him. Now, how inclined is someone else going to be the next time they see a policeman in trouble to do that? And let's talk about intergenerational trauma. What's he going to say to his kid as that child's growing up? He's likely to say, look, if you see a cop in trouble, just get out of there as quickly as you can. Why, Daddy? But let me tell you what happens to him. So now he's got to relive that whole thing all over again. There you have your intergenerational trauma. What else we've got? Will you share your child's? Yes, I shall, Jennifer.
Further up, there was one, George said, would it not be better to tell children that they should expect racism?
Well, that's what Black parents do and Indigenous parents do. It's not the Black kids who are getting it, it's the kids above the line.
I even warned my Black new friends, new Canadian friends, to be careful.
Yes, yes. George Ryder of St. George, yes. But you see, if you don't if you don't have to take it into consideration, you don't think about it. You just go merrily along your way. Yes, Deanne Allen, yes.
I just wanted to say that all Black parents have that, what you call the talk.
The talk, yes.
With their children. And it's done out of necessity.
Yes.
And I've been asked by people who have seen that in America, does it happen here? And I said, yes, you have to do it. It's a necessity.
Absolutely. And so my question is, does the church understand this? The church writ large. Do you understand this? Do you understand what your congregants need from you? Do you understand the political activism, the social activism that's necessary?
We have one other question. We have our phone person.
Yeah, there's a phone person. I see Camille. Yes, phone person. 514, let me see if I can tell you.
629-9810.
Yes, please.
There he goes. Go ahead.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. I'm just wondering, you're talking as though there's a clear line and a clear above and below. And my impression would be that there's kind of a fair range between definitely way below and definitely way below.
Absolutely.
Okay, that was the question.
Yes, but that's exactly what why Isabel Wilkinson says, let's not use the word race anymore, apart from the fact that it has no biological basis. Let's not use it anymore, because even that there are lines between each other. And the other thing is that in some instances, you might find yourself above the line, and others below the line. That's not based on pigmentation. But what Isabel Wilkinson is talking about is caste. And she'd say, if you're born in a caste, they try to keep you there. And even people who look like you might try to keep you down. And it's in the Black community, we call it crabs in the barrel. They might try to keep you down because, we've set it up so much like there's only so much room at the table, which is a lie. Just build a bigger table, for goodness sake.
Yeah. May I?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Do you have a reference to a book or a paper or something for the fact that there's no biological basis to race?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, there is no biological base to it.
No, I know this is true. I'm just wondering if you have something that could be cited.
Oh, absolutely. I'll try and have something for you by tomorrow. If I don't, I will make sure and get it to Dion within a few days and he can get it out to you. Would that be okay?
Okay, super, thanks.
Yeah, and the WHO has also said that.
Okay, that would be a good place for me to look. Thanks.
Okay. I have
Camille, then Penny.
Camille?
Yes, are you hearing me?
Yes, now I am, yes.
Okay, so you asked the question if the church understands, some of these issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there have been some very valiant and honorable attempts to address this.
Mm-hmm.
By especially when we had migrants from the Caribbean coming over here,
mm-hmm.
By bringing in priests from the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
The bee in my bonnet is that what ended up happening is that we ended up with enclave congregations,
mm-hmm.
and there didn't seem to me to be clear lines of how do you integrate the people whose particular cultural needs are being addressed, hopefully by the minister.
Mm-hmm.
How are these folks also connecting with the quote unquote establishment or the leadership of the church?
Mm-hmm.
Because the last thing we want to happen in this diocese is to have a group of activists on the sidelines continuously hammering away at the church and racism. We want to solve this together.
Agreed.
So my question is, and this is a dilemma that I'm sure that our bishop and other leaders in the church are facing. We don't want to create enclaves, racial enclaves, but at the same time, we need to make sure that the particular cultural needs are acknowledged and met without alienating people and without also making white people feel uncomfortable or always on the edge, wondering if they're offending the other person. So that's, I think, is an important issue that our diocese wants to address. And I'm just very, very pleased that we've decided that we're going to be working on this racial issue here together, and not with marginalized people or people feeling marginalized, barking down and tearing down the church.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. It calls for open, honest, painful dialogue. We can't do this if some of us maintain a position of being outside looking in, or if some of us maintain a position of this is mine and we are going to be beneficent and let you come play in our sandbox. We've got to tear down those walls, those metaphorical walls. I'm not telling you to pull down your church. We've got to tear down those metaphorical walls and meet each other where we are, but as human beings, as we've got to get rid of the dominance. Those who were born above the line have got to stop talking and listen and internalize what those below the line are telling them. And those below the line have got to understand that those above the line are trapped also. Everybody's trapped by this hegemony. Everybody's trapped by this ideology. Everybody.
Right.
Everybody.
So we have Penny Rankin and then Patricia Aline.
Okay, yes, Penny.
Oops, hi. Maybe this follows very well. I'm a white woman. I have a son who has severe, or not severe, always, but mental health and addiction issues. And during COVID, there were a number of times when he was exceedingly vulnerable. And the police would get involved, okay? And I am so aware that had this child of mine been Black, that the response that he would have had, which remarkably was really supportive on more than one occasion, would have been very, very different. And that is a window for me. And I don't know that it's a window that sort of broke through any major spiritual experience for me. But it did teach me a lot. Or put it this way, I don't know if it taught me a lot, but I'm exceedingly grateful. But it does open my heart in ways that I actually thought my heart was open, but I had to learn that it needed to be open more.
Yes.
Because of that, because it's shared vulnerability,
right? Which,
if you are above the line, which I was born into, I mean, maybe you could say it was a moment of grace. I don't know. I mean, certainly it was very painful grace.
Yes.
And more than one time. But that was an experience that I feel compelled to share as a white woman, not because I want to sort of share, well, there's a term like your laundry or whatever, but to share the reality of of the pain. And I benefited, and my son benefited by virtue of his skin. And you've already said it's 99.9% or whatever else. I mean, that's how I, and that's how I feel. But how I feel doesn't translate itself into what actually transpires in these situations. And that I think is so important and potent in the message that that I want to share and that I know that you are sharing on a day-to-day basis. I don't live it on a day-to-day basis. But anyway, that was what I wanted to raise my hand and share with you.
And I thank you so very much for that, because you put your finger on it. You've put, as I said earlier, it's one thing to know, to understand it factually, but to understand the existential reality of it is a whole different ballgame. And what you're drawing our attention to is the existential reality. And that is beautiful. And I thank you very, very much. And I know that wasn't easy for you. And I'm very appreciative of what you just said. And I know everyone else is also. Thank you very much, Penny.
Go ahead, Patricia.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for this seminar, and I really appreciate it, and I hope that everybody will benefit from it. And my statement goes back to what you were saying about what the talk that we have to give our children, where the parents are traumatized for a second time. But my point is that I'd like to say that we are constantly traumatized throughout, because last year I lived in New York State, and I would come home fairly often. And when I'm crossing the border, the situation is, if you don't drive a broken down hoopty and you have a nice car, either you stole it or you're carrying drugs, then that's how you got it. Because the first thing they're going to ask you is, whose car is that? Did you pay for it? And sometimes, can I see the registration?
Yes.
Also, driving through the towns, this happened down south and it happened up north in New York. You'll be followed. Again, that car is too nice for you. You'll be followed, and you know that they're punching in your info to see if the car could seemingly belong to you or whatever. And last year, after the Black Lives Matter thing, I thought about stopping and then asking him, why are you following me? And then I remembered, Pat, you might be older, but you still have 10. So therefore, just go by your way. He'll soon realize you're on your way home when he sees that. I said that because I made that statement because I would like everyone to realize it's not just the young children. We are all victims. And I'm grateful for this seminar tonight, because it's always been my wish that people would understand. I have made it a point to understand Caucasian people, because I was raised with them and went to school with them and everything. And I just wish that they would understand me. And I just made that statement tonight so that let somebody think, I'm sure everybody does, excuse me for that, but it's pretty awful.
Please don't excuse yourself for speaking your truth. Please don't do that. I thank you very much for having shared. Thank you.
Thank you.
You, as far as I'm concerned, people who open themselves, you're doing God's will. I'm not a theologian, not at all. I don't pretend to be one, but in my understanding of theology, as far as I'm concerned, you're witnessing. And that's one of the things, of course, that happens in the Black churches. And that's why the Black churches are so important. And one of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow. Yes, George.
Just a comment about the social determinants of health.
Yes.
You see, in this community of Mohawks, this is a reservation I live on. And you can see the lines very clear right here in front of us.
Yeah.
And this is not a fabrication of white versus indigenous people,
not at all.
But this is indigenous versus indigenous.
Yes.
Where because I have money and you don't, you're lower than I am.
Yes.
And you see, at one time, this community was not like that. This community was very open. But the almighty dollar has become the ruling force here. That's what's changed this community. And that we could say was the white influence, I guess, on this community was money.
Yes. Yes. You know, thank you for that. I noticed that I've worked with Mohawks both at Ganawake and Akosasne and Genesadage. And you're absolutely right. I mean, over the years, I've seen the changes come in. And there was a point, I mean, when I was at Ganawake, for example, I remember one of the warriors saying to me one day, he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Montreal." And he says, "Nah, where are you really from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from the Caribbean." And he said, "Are you one of those things that they call a West Indian?" And I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "Oh, so we're all Indians together." And, you know, and they made me corn soup. And here you go, Dion. I made them rice and peas and cocoa. But it was that camaraderie. And over the years, as you say, as I've seen more and more money moving, it's the same thing as coloration in the Black community. The closer you are to the dominant, it's almost as though you cut off those at the bottom. You become more important. I don't want anything to do with you. And that is a direct outgrowth of 17th century colonialism. If you set up one group, one thing where it's more desirable, of course, the closer people get to it, the more they're going to want it. It's the way, yeah. And so that's what we've got to tear down. Thank you very much, George. Rosalind? Oh, Ross McGregor, how are you, Ross?
Hi.
Hi, it's good to see you.
And you. This is really moving.
Thank you.
I'm pretty pink and above the line in terms of my own experience, but about 20 years ago, I started to look into our history and discovered that we're descended from Black slaves in Bermuda, enslaved people in Bermuda. And when I came back, I spoke to my aunt. My aunt was so angry with me. She said, "I know my grandmother was a person of color." And then she said when she was a little girl, she visited Park Extension. And some children said to her, because she tanned, "Are you colored?" And she said, "No." And then she didn't talk to me for the 2 years before she died. She died while I was away. And the intergenerational stuff is my grandmother was the first to really pass white. And it was the family secret. And there's a shame.
Yes.
That's gone from generation to generation of owning who we are.
Yes. And that is what happens when you're dealing with white ideology and white hegemony. That's exactly it, Ross. That's exactly it. Good to see you.
And you. And
I'm very cognizant of the time. I want to tell you one of the things that happens, and is people, you know, people have to sit down very often and look at names. People give birth to their children and they say, "Well, I got to vet the name." And you know, Muslims are doing it now. Black people are doing it. Indigenous people are doing it. You know, because they're afraid that if they give their child a name, that somebody will say, "Oh, well, that's an indigenous name," or "That's a, you know, a Black name," or that the child, it hampers their career goals. It hampers the achievements they can make. And there's a lot of research that shows that people take that CV and they put it in the garbage. You send in the same CV. A lot of research has been done. Where you send in the same CV and you give one a white name, Jane, for example, and you give the other one an indigenous name like Broken Leg or somebody, you know, Or like Tanisha, the ones that aren't white goes that they don't assume are white, even though it's the same CP, goes right into the garbage. So people are sitting around thinking, what do I name my kid? That's what it's like. They don't want them, you don't want them to stick out. You want them to be able to get a job later. I know friend of mine named her kid Cheryl, and she told me, she says, I named my kid Cheryl because I want to give my kid a step up. So what is supposed to provide a sense of common identity for these kids is often used to segregate them and deny opportunities, because this whole thing about the name, certainly within the Black community, came about because, the civil rights movement said, Malcolm X said, that name that you're using is a slave name. Get rid of that name. Malcolm, I'm keeping. My parents gave me that. That X, that other name, that's a slave name. I am very well aware that my name, Lashley, is a slave name. I know it. And so Malcolm said, I don't want it. The same thing Muhammad Ali said, I don't want to use Cassius Clay anymore. That Clay name, no. So people started naming their kids things like that they thought sounded Arabic or sounded African, and that was supposed to give them a sense of I am somebody. That was what we all said growing up. I am somebody. That is what it was supposed to do. But now it's being that very thing that's supposed to give people a sense of purpose is being used against them. Now, I want to give you I have an exercise that I want you to do in preparation for tomorrow. So I'm going to skip this one here with the microaggressions, especially since I've talked about a little bit about it. And I want to tell you that being a good ally first calls for introspection. It calls for acknowledging, acknowledging privilege is a useless, meaningless thing. It makes no sense without actions. It's like, with all due respect, people do the land, they say, oh, I'm going to do the land recognition. I said, okay, you've done the land recognition. Now what are you going to do? What are you going to do? How are you going to help bring about some kind of reconciliation? Just saying that means nothing. It becomes performative. So be aware of that. If you want to be a good ally, walk next to the person. Don't walk ahead of them. Very often allies become oppressors because they take over. I say, I know what's best for you. I know we should do this. You should do that. No. Ask that person, what do you need? What would you like me to do? Otherwise, you continue living above the line. You continue oppressing. So be led rather than trying to be. And therefore, don't allow the allyship that you're doing to become another form of oppression. So I know that I've got people in the chat. So I'm going to do this, and then hope we have some more time to finish up the chapter. We might go until 9:05. So here's an exercise I'd like you to do. And I want you, we're thinking about introspection. I just told you about allies. So let's take a few minutes. You probably won't take all of 10, but because I want you to do it as fast as you can without sitting around thinking about it. Just let it come. Knowing what you know now, not necessarily from what we've done tonight, but what you've known now, the knowledge you've accumulated. Knowing what you know now. If you met your younger self today, what would you advise them? I want you to use your heart, not your intellectual sophistication. That's why I want you to do it as quickly as possible. If you can do it in 5 minutes, it's even better. This exercise, the faster you can do it, the better. So here's what I want you to do. Identify 3 important things. Not things like saying, I know my privilege, or I'm going to read the land statement. Identify 3 important things that you personally must do to bring about equity, diversity, and inclusion. This is about you. It's not about the church, it's not about the institution, it's not about your neighbors, it's about you. Go. Take a look at the chat. That's nice. Huh. How we doing? You done? Okay. Does anybody feel comfortable sharing what their commitment is?
I'd share.
Okay.
I'm Jennifer James.
Hello, Jennifer.
Hi. You know, one thing that really struck me was you were talking about the talk that you have with that's necessary for people of color to have with their children about hoodies and stuff like that. And my first thought was, I wish that I would have had more conversations with my own child about that. And I always thought I was raised as a very in a very accepting kind of family, non-judgmental, but it's not a conversation I thought about having with him. And that's a shame, because I think it's important. The other thing I kind of wish, the other thing that came to my mind right away, I wish I would have stood up to my elders who were, in some cases, pretty racist. And I wish I would have been more willing to sort of confront them and say, that's not okay.
And you know, don't beat yourself up for that, because it's very difficult, especially if you're close to your family, to take that stand. You have to be so secure in yourself that you are not going to be punished in some way for this. And I'm very cognizant of that. It took me a long time to stand up to some members of my family and say, no, hell no. And I knew when I did it that some of them would never speak to me again. But I had to steel myself first to say, racism is wrong.
Right.
So I don't care if you are a Black person telling me to hate white people, or you're a white person telling your kid to hate Black people. You don't know these people, and just to hate them because they're whatever is wrong. Tell me they've done this and we need to talk. I'm fine with that. So don't beat yourself up.
It isn't my parents. It was my grandparents more than my
but whoever it is, just don't beat yourself up.
The funny thing is, my grandfather was a persecuted Jew. Like, you think of anyone, he would understand, but he didn't.
I'll tell you something. In Barbados, you are going to find very few Jews, not because they're not there. Because in the slave trade, back to our friend the 17th century, in the slave trade, the British said if you were Jewish, you couldn't participate in the trade. You couldn't do that. And a lot of Jews, we have the second oldest synagogue in the Western Hemisphere in Barbados. But what happened was that they had to make a living. They couldn't participate. They'd come over from Portugal into Brazil, and then from Brazil, which had the largest slave colonies, up into the rest of the Caribbean. And a lot of them converted to Christianity, mostly Anglicanism. So because that was the official religion of Barbados, still is, so that they could participate in the commerce. I mean, I have Jewish relatives in Barbados, but that's what happened. I don't dislike my Jewish relatives. I recognize that our common ancestor did these things, but my cousins are my cousins. And we talk about it, but we've talked about it openly, and they've said, you know, it pains us what's happened to that branch of our family. And I say, and it hurts me that you had to live like this, and kind of, so that we can reach each other. The thing is, we have to reach each other where we are and with open hearts. Hatred is not going to do it. We have to reach each other. So, yeah. Carla,
Go ahead, Carla.
Did you want to share what your three things are?
Well, what my one thing is, I didn't get past one, but okay. One of the things that I'm quite an aggressive conversationalist. Mm-hmm. And if there's a pause in the conversation, I'm very happy to leap in with both feet and take over. And I find that with my congregation, I'm a priest, so I'm fine with my congregation. I have a mixed congregation, Black people and white people. And a lot of my Black people are, they're intimidated by that style. Mm-hmm. So what I have to do, what I'd really like to do, is to just make myself slow down and give people space to respond. Because if I do that, if I take those extra 5 or 6 seconds, then my people will consider that a safe space. Mm-hmm. And then they will give me, share their ideas and their feelings. Whereas if I don't do that, I see their face just go blank, and they're just going to step back, and it just breaks my heart, and I know I'm doing it, so I have to be a little bit more vigilant to give that space.
Okay, thank you for that. George?
I'm enjoying this this conversation very, very much.
Thank you.
If I could say, as a young child, I recall my parents telling me that I must always treat other people, no matter what their color of their skin, as equals. Mm-hmm. And I've always tried to follow this in my lifetime. I haven't always been perfect in that score. But if I look back over many years of working with people, I've done baptism like work with people of all different colors. And what I find very helpful and useful is that I must walk next to those people, walk with them in their culture. Yeah. We're in, as I used to say to many of them, we're in the same boat. I may be of this type of culture, and you in that, but we're in the same boat. So let us walk together. And on that point, I really underwrite what you said about the land. It kind of irritates me that we say this land acknowledgement every week, and we don't even know what we're saying.
Exactly.
In my book.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And I think this is where we need to leap. We need to better understand, what are we talking about? What does this mean?
What does it mean?
And that's the culture that I'm talking about here. That we must start learning to walk side by side. In this case, we're talking about Black people. It doesn't matter who the people are, but we must learn. And then I appreciate your help in this regard.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Doesn't matter, but this is not, as I said, this is not about Black and white people. It's got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with the ideology and hegemony and who's above and who's below, and how do we deal with that? Diana.
Yes, well, I put a few things in the chat, and I may repeat. I very rapidly came up with more than 3 things I want to tell my younger self.
Okay.
One of the most important is that our faith tells us that everyone is a child of God.
Mm-hmm.
And I would definitely want my younger self to know that and remember that. And that takes care of a lot of the putting down and ignoring behaviors that we may want to engage in. To remember always that everyone of any color, of any economic status, or forever, or whatever, in our faith is a child of God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's been a good point for me to hang on to.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Robert, anything you feel you must personally do to bring about equity, diversity, and inclusion?
As soon as I find the unmute button, which I have.
There you are.
Hello, Myrna.
Hi.
It's been
oh my
a while.
God, it's Robert.
Yes, it's Robert.
How are you?
I am great. How are you?
I'm fine. I heard the voice and I said, no, that's Robert. That's Bob.
That's it. But it's been a while, and
it's been a long time.
Yeah, we'll have to chat offline or such.
Oh, that would be lovely.
Great. We'll exchange coordinates after. But to answer your questions, other than it's great to see you again, really.
It's nice to see you.
Thank you. What would I say to myself as a younger self? I would say, Robert, listen carefully, really analyze and digest what people say before you take an opinion or before you reply.
Good on you.
You know, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and sometimes they get mixed up.
Mm-hmm.
And that causes a few problems. So I think if we're willing to start with that, and I would say it to my younger self, I've done it at times. I probably haven't done it enough. That would be the advice I would give myself. An example of advice. The other aspect of your questions, the 3 important things, is 2 words: get involved.
Yeah.
Don't just be a spectator. Don't just watch. Don't just look at the news and lament and complain and it's terrible about this and the whole thing. I mean, we have to decide to get involved with a group where we can make a difference, and at least try to make a difference. If you don't try, you'll never know. And if you try and fail, you can always try again. Second item would be, it's been mentioned before, is really to walk in other people's shoes, or try to walk in other people's shoes beside them, and also try to understand their culture, whatever it may be. Black, white, green, blue, it's irrelevant. It's just that if you're living with people, I mean, in our nation, we have many cultures, and we have to, if we're going to be with them, we have to understand aspects of those cultures. My wife comes from a different culture, and I learned to understand that. And the other aspect, the third one, is really show compassion. Mm-hmm. It's a word that a lot of people use, but not everyone does it. And I think that we really, from the heart, have to show that compassion and greater feeling for others, and not the big I am and people worrying about themselves only. I'm not saying you shouldn't worry about yourself, but you should also include others within there. So those would be the 3 things, Myrna.
Thank you so much. Robert, I want to tell you, I look at you and I have tears in my eyes. First of all, I'm so bleeding happy to see you.
Thank you.
Oh, it's so lovely to see you.
It's lovely to see you. Really.
But you and I, we went to certain things together.
We first met as teenagers.
Yes, but you were one of the people, Robert, and I say this with all sincerity, who never, ever made me feel Black.
Well, thank you.
You never, ever did. I always felt safe with you. I never felt that I had to wear the mask.
Well, I had other Black friends and Chinese friends and people of different nationalities, Arabic, Jewish, and to me, they were all people and good friends, and I was glad to have them. But thank you.
I thank you. You have no idea some of the things that I had to deal with back then, or maybe you do. But thank you for all you did. Thank you.
My pleasure, and we'll have to talk about it offline.
We'll talk about it at some point. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Robert.
dear.
Okay. I have Ivan Wakeland. Is it Ivan or Yvonne?
Yvonne.
Oh, Yvonne. I thought I beg your pardon, ma'am.
That's okay. My name is Yvonne. I've been called several things. Don't worry about it, Myrna. I would learn not to judge too quickly, not to make assumptions of, the gut feelings that we do sometimes make too fast, and to be patient. I'm a do-it person, and sometimes that gets in the way. So you have to listen and be more patient.
Okay.
So those are my three things.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
514. Let's see.
Go ahead.
514. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Sorry, I should have said I'm Taddy.
You're a pardon, ma'am?
I should have said my name is Taddy.
Kathy. Hello, Kathy.
Taddy, Taddy, or else Stephanie.
Oh, hello, Stephanie. Daddy. Okay.
I'd like to share one of the things, because it's kind of a question.
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
something I feel I ought to do, and I'm really not sure how. I'm a little bit in the same position as Rod, in that my dad's family is Indigenous. I look very white. And maybe that's part of it. But I find I notice things that not everybody seems to have noticed, which certainly seem like examples of biases and prejudice and various other things to me. But I know them. If someone says something overtly racist, right, you can say something back. But when it seems to be sort of general attitudes and you don't think the other people are probably aware of it, and I feel I should do something, but I really have no idea where to begin.
It can be very intimidating. It can be extremely intimidating to confront things like that. And that doesn't make you, it doesn't make you someone who doesn't care, or you have to weigh. I always tell people, if you're going to confront, make sure you're safe. Don't do things to put yourself in danger. Always make sure you're safe, because you can always live to fight another day.
It's more, I have no clue how to make people see what seems to be folded into what they just did or said or didn't do or didn't say.
Well, your aim here is not to try to change them as much as your aim is to try to show who you are and how you live your life. And hopefully by that become an example to them. If you set out to change people, that's seldom going to work, especially if they're people who don't want to change. But I would advise you, for what it's worth, to try not to put them on the back foot. Try not to make them feel defensive, because when people feel defensive, they stop listening. People hear, but they often don't listen. There's a big difference between hearing and listening. So that would be my advice to you. And and sometimes you got to pick your battles. Sometimes you got to pick your battles. And that's not always easy to do. But you don't have to fight every battle. Just fight the important ones, the ones that are important to you, that you really feel that when you're finished fighting them, you're going to feel as though you've contributed something to you and your growth and to the wider society.
I wanted my parents to be right.
I beg your pardon, Diane? I thought Diane Bouchard was
I think
saying
she accidentally unmuted.
Oh, okay. So let's go through here. Okay, expect that the person in front of me is set by God instead of being afraid of them. Step outside my comfort zone, not to be afraid of being wrong. Listen with my heart. Perfect. Thank you for the wonderful evening. You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. Listen to music and read books from BIPOC creators. Oh, that is a big one, including those by young people, and talk with them. Remember that it's okay to talk with Black and Indigenous folks about racism. Don't be so polite to talk about racism, good, and assume it's happening to someone else. Let me ask you a question. You're all, I imagine, you're all Christians, you might maybe put up your Christmas tree and everything. Have you ever looked at the ornaments on your tree? Are they all representative of above the line? Do you know how difficult it is to find a Black Santa Claus or white, or, I mean, I found in a store until after a couple of years, I got one. I got a big Mrs. Claus and a big Mr. Claus. Ever ask yourself why does the angel on the top of the tree always have to be white? What message is that sending to the kids?
Come to Tyndale St. George's every Christmas. You'll see.
Yes.
Santa Claus.
Exactly. Yeah. But these are questions. What are our ornaments? What do they look like? Are they inclusive or are they not? These are things that we take for granted. If you live above the line, you don't have to think about that. But think about the little kid who's Indigenous, who never sees an ornament on that tree that reminds them of them, or an angel. I mean, I remember a kid asked me once, and we'll talk about that tomorrow, do Black people go to heaven? And she asked me that after Sunday school. Okay, I was shocked the first time I went into the home of a Black parishioner during Advent. There were Black angels and holy people everywhere. Then I wondered, why did I never see these in the store I went to? And why did it surprise me that there existed? Exactly. 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 Thank you, Deborah, for that. Let's see, is there anyone? I don't want anyone leaving without feeling that I've addressed. The lie I was taught growing up was that Black people of other races were inferior. It was that racism is in the past. I would tell my past self to question why my white teachers told me the US had become equal and diverse, and yet there were no Black kids in my school. Precisely. What about the books we buy our kids? What about the stories? Why is it that when we teach Black history, it's always about slavery? What hope is there in telling a Black kid only about slavery? How can we have books like 10 Parmi Sauvages in school still? What is that telling an Indigenous kid about hope? James, I think you underestimate the depth of the journey. I would say to my younger self to not waste 15 years coasting on my upbringing. I was brought up in a very diverse environment by the standards of the 80s and 90s. For a long time, I thought that meant I had it all figured out. I only really re-engaged with issues of race in the middle of the 2010. Okay, this child of God has to go lead company.
There's a couple of newer ones too down at the bottom.
Okay, let me see. I don't want anyone to leave without the light. Okay, let me go down.
Oh, including, Chris Bell.
I was shocked. Had not for Harry Belafonte, the very concept of a Black Santa Claus would not even have occurred to me. And that's what it means to live above the line.
Well, and Chris is Black. So.
Yeah, exactly. But what I'm saying is that we're all trapped. It never occurs to you, even if you live below the line. To the Indigenous child to say, why does Santa Claus have to be Black? To say to the child who's a person of color, why does Santa Claus have to be white? To say to we just accept it. We don't question it. So it never even occurred to this person who's Black that Santa Claus could be Black. We've got to ask ourselves why. There's also Black. Good on you, Diane. Took me a while. Yes, it takes a while to find them. I know. Growing up on the West Coast, family road trips up to the island to visit my grandparents almost included the inappropriate game. How many drunken Indians on the bridge? As we drove through the Duncan Reserve, it was a game played with intense fervor as children. We never stopped to ask what happened to those people so that they got to the place in their lives. No, because that's what colonialism has done. It's entrapped those above the line and those below the line. Everybody's trapped by this horror. My late mother collected nativity scenes from all over the world. Indigenous and Blacks were very good. Hello again, Myrna. So great to. Hi, Rob. Okay, thank you, Robert. Got it. Got it. Any easy reads? Young adult novels. Yeah, I recommend the Field Guide to the North American Tea. It is by a Black Montrealer about a Haitian tea who moves from Quebec to Texas and is funny and poignant about young people's experience in our country. Yeah. Okay. I've been encourage your friends from all races to take up. Oh, that's a big one, to take up leadership roles. Big one. Include, and the church needs to do that. Make sure that everybody's got leadership. We can no longer afford to have that glass ceiling sitting there and say, but we love them. Nah, that's not going to be. Include and invite different cultures to participate with you in all aspects of life. Yes, Elaine Bilodeau. Speak up to all races, even if it hurts family or friends. This is a big one, but you've got to be prepared for the consequences. Encourage your friends from all races to take up, okay, include, yeah, speak up, so yeah. When I worked at McGill and we were hosting parties for students with young kids, I had to convince the grad student who was running the event to get the more expensive Black Barbies as gift, I'm sure. Okay, so that's it. So my final question, Miranda, did you want to say something?
Thank you so much. I know that you missed my question. I have been really and thoroughly enjoying the presentation. So I have put a question at the point when you're asking, what can the church do?
No, I didn't ask about the church.
No, that was
That's for
earlier
tomorrow.
on. That was earlier on, that was not picked up in the chat.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, so if it's possible to still take it, I would love to make the comment.
Please do.
Thank you so much. I said, here is my response. I'm reading what I have in the chat. Can the church take a look at Black History Month starting in 2022 and seek to bring this matter from the pulpit and in programs for the month, and maybe have for the next 5 years an intentional focus. This will be a visible and open behavior action. That's when you were talking about behavior change.
Yes.
Can we also, from this seminar, write a collect or a prayer that will be used as of 2022 Black History Month?
Could I, oh, that's beautiful. Could I ask you to please do not lose that?
Well, it's
no,
in the
because
chat.
tomorrow we're going to actually be dealing with things about what the church specifically can do.
Okay, so I'll copy this, but it's
Can
in
you
the
hold
chat.
on to that for tomorrow? That's brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we
Is
have
there anyone else who hasn't been heard?
Taddy. I think Taddy still had a question.
I
Go
think
ahead.
Taddy's, I think her, Taddy, are you
Sorry, I
speaking?
just wanted to apologize for disappearing halfway through your answer to the question. My phone just ran out of time, so
Okay.
I didn't mean to hang up on you in the middle of a sentence.
That's all right. No harm done. Shall I see you tomorrow?
In the afternoon.
Fine, thank you. Have a good evening.
You too.
So before we go, the person who asked, will they have access to the slides? Yeah, I said yes. Dion will make sure that happens. Is everybody okay? How's everybody doing? Does anybody feel that they need some debriefing in anything that? Does everybody feel comfortable? Anybody have any difficulties that need to be addressed because of this? Okay. So if you are okay signing off, I shall, but if there's anyone who needs anything, let me know. You all okay? I can't see all of you because I can't see. Dion, can you take a look and see if anybody needs anything, please? I can't see from here.
I am checking and there's no one waving at me, and I think everyone's good.
I just can't find that chat that we missed by
I know
Miranda.
I can't see it either.
Miranda,
No, me either.
was it a private chat to Myrna?
No, so I can scroll up.
I just
see if I find that. But I also just saw a chat where somebody is saying I was broken. If you look at the bottom of the chat, some messages are coming in.
Okay, I don't want anybody to. Okay.
Anyway, I'm just sorry we missed Miranda's
At the
comment.
cathedral, we lost a young person today, I think by suicide. Racism was involved. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Is that person Brenda? Are you okay?
I think a lot of people at the
Oh, it says direct message.
Oh, it's a
to-
direct message to me. I see.
To
So
a
let's-
Valerie Bennett. I think that's what I picked up. Direct message. Sorry, it came in
Okay,
at.
so I see. This is a direct message to me.
Okay. So
see.
I will
didn't
copy
realize
it and
that.
paste it at the bottom so you can
Put
have it there.
Yeah, make sure it goes to everyone, and then I can capture.
Oh
it
yeah,
also.
I just.
Michelle Rattray. I'm
Thank
just looking
you.
to see if anybody wrote me a direct message.
That changes to everyone. Oh,
Yes.
how do I change
Don't
this
want to.
everyone?
There's a new message.
There's a little triangle beside the name. If you just click on it, everyone should be at the top of the list. Or
Okay,
just type
thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
It says to everyone in the meeting. I don't have any personal messages. I don't want to violate anybody's.
Okay, I think it came into everyone.
Got it, Miranda. Thank you.
Okay, good.
I was
Wicked
just
awesome.
stricken because it wasn't there, and I was thinking,
Yeah.
No, I didn't
okay.
see it either.
I've been trying to follow.
Okay, I don't. Okay.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah, that came in at 5.
I think
I sent
that's a
that at
message to me.
5:31.
Okay.
Okay, got it.
Don't have
Perfect.
anything here. All is well after the 9th bell. This is a great start. Okay. So, all right. So I didn't miss anybody there. Okay, wait a minute. Hang on. I have one here. It's to everyone. Okay. I was completely broken.
That's the
Also
one I was
broken
talking.
when I discovered one of my good friends admitted to the mask around me because I was presumed to be white. Although I have my Scottish color, I also have my Mi'kmaq features, which caused lots of trouble when I was younger. I understand a bit more now that I have to work more to make sure people feel safe and welcome. Sandra, since this came to everyone, are you okay?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's see.
There was one question about lateral violence.
Oh yes, lateral violence. People feel that they can't attack the person who's hurting them. And it often happens that they displace it onto someone else, usually within their own group. And, you know, as I said, in the Black community, this is often known as crabs in the bucket. You can't let anybody else get up. You lash out at that other person because you feel that's where it's safe. You can't lash out at the person who's hurting you. And lateral violence is a big problem, a big issue among people who view themselves as minorities and feel trapped and feel they've nowhere to go. They just lash out. They laterally towards could be the mother, the brother, your friend, whoever is within that circle bears the brunt of that anger.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And it's a known phenomenon. It's displacement. Yes?
Sort of like coming home and slamming a bunch of doors.
but it's usually towards a person.
No. I know, but
So,
doors are more forgiving.
Doors are more forgiving, but you see, if it was just a door, I mean, it'd be bad. You get them to anger management, but sometimes this results in domestic violence or abuse against children. As I said, it's displacement. They can't. So you go to work. I'll tell you. I know it's after 9, and I don't want to keep you, but I feel I need to answer your questions. So as long as you're here, I'll be here. But I was treating this lady once, and she was in a really bad relationship with domestic violence. And the social workers kept saying to her, you've got to leave, you know, your children are at risk, you know, your husband's doing these things. And she'd leave for a while, but then she'd go back. And so they called me and they said, can you talk to her? We don't know what's going on. Is it cultural? What is it? So I met with her, you know, the courts asked me to. I met with her. Nobody wanted to take her kids away, but it had reached a point where it was like, you know, we're at the point of taking her kids. What do we do? And she told me the most heartbreaking story. She said, you know, they all want to take, and I want the church to hear this too. She said, you know, they all come and tell me I should take my kids, I should leave my husband, I should go wherever, and the kids will be safe. She said, but what's going to happen to me after? Who's there to support me? She said, when I leave and I go into those homes, and somebody in the home, and it happened to her, called her the N-word. She said, there was nobody there for me. I didn't have anybody to turn to. There was nobody to support me. She says, at least when I'm with him, even if he beats me, if I come home and tell him someone called me the N-word, I don't have to explain it. He knows what I'm talking about. He understands my pain. He hears me. So she said, until they reach the point where they can see and understand the things that I live, what am I going to do? So yes, he comes home and he as you know, Dion mentioned lateral violence. Yes, he comes home and he takes his things out on me and he beats me. But the payoff for me is that I'm in a safe harbor when someone attacks me racially. I can let it go. I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to pretend that it doesn't hurt. He understands. And I need the church and people who work within this area to go beyond the surface, to understand, to hear the hurt and the pain and the lived reality of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and of our brothers and sisters of color, our Black and brown brothers and sisters. We need to hear that, not just as this superficial, isn't that horrible? And let's pray, it's fine. But you know, one thing you don't learn in Black church is that you need action, you need activism. Jesus was a social activist. He didn't say sit there and swallow. And that's where we need to go. So as I said, I'm not attacking anyone. Let's do this together. Let's work in peace and love. And if everybody feels safe and is ready to go, I want to thank you very much. Thank you for coming. And what time are we starting tomorrow morning, Dion?
If everyone can make their way to log in before 10 o'clock, we'll be starting in our next session at 10 a.m. on the dot.
Okay, because yeah, I might have to drop out, as I said to you, that I might have to drop out some of the slides because it's shorter than I thought it was going to be.
No problem, no problem.
Yeah, but you'll have the slides anyway, so
exactly.
We'll go there. And I want to show you this last slide. Where we're going is here. If we think, no, you know what? I'll start with it tomorrow morning. I don't want to keep you any longer. I don't want to keep you any longer. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
We'll just do a prayer together. I have it prepared. So we'll just like take a moment to draw our thoughts and minds. Lord, it is night. The night is for stillness. Let us be still in the presence of God. It is night after a long day. What has been done has been done. What has not been done has not been done. Let it be. The night is dark. Let our fears of the darkness of the world and of our own lives rest in you. The night is quiet. Let the quietness of your peace enfold us, all dear to us, and all who have no peace. The night heralds the dawn. Let us look expectantly to a new day, new joys, new possibilities. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Good night. See you tomorrow morning.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.